Welcome and thank you for joining Partnering with Your Product Owner presented by Digineer. My name is Jack Thiesing and I will be your moderator today. I would like to introduce today's speaker. Jen Swieringa is a senior business analyst, product owner support consultant with Digineer. She has spent the last 9 years in the third-party logistics, pharmacy benefit, and healthcare industries. As an innovative leader with strong coaching and agile experience, Jen is passionately devoted to aiding business analysts in expanding the tools in their toolbox and advancing their careers. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A feature of this webinar. Also, Jen is broadcasting with her webinar or her webcam. Zoom has options that allow you to change how you see her during the presentation. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Jen.
Thanks, Jack. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about what I suspect is a common situation. And I hope that by hearing about my trials and tribulations and the different techniques I use to build a relationship with my product owner, you'll get some ideas to try with your own product owner. Now let's look at the agenda. So today we're going to talk about product owner responsibilities, and we're going to ask a question of the group. We're going to talk about my situation, some of the solutions I landed on, the techniques I used, including soft skills, brainstorming, story mapping, meeting notes, wireframes, and mockups. We'll ask another question about if you've used any of these techniques yourself. Then I've got a section on putting it all into action, taking all of those skills, those techniques, and putting them all together. And then I also want to touch on some of my ineffective techniques and then answer any questions that you have. So let's start with the product owner responsibilities.
So Jen, what does a product owner do?
Well, here's a really high level diagram. It's very general. And as a certified product owner myself, I wanted to share this with you so that you could see what I was expecting from my product owner. And really, first and foremost, they have to define that vision. They need to understand the future state they want for the product, if it's trying to solve problems, what goals it's trying to fulfill. So they really have to give us that vision. They also need to manage that product backlog. And, that includes participating in sprint planning, grooming, defining the acceptance criteria, and verifying that the items are complete. They also need to prioritize the needs, and that includes prioritizing the backlog, the features, and then individual stories, getting them lined up for the next sprint. They also need to oversee the development stages, and that means being involved with the Scrum team and confirming the team is working on the correct items. Then they need to always be anticipating those client needs. And running the new ideas by the subject matter expert. So if they themselves get an idea, it's always helpful if they've run it by folks and gotten that sort of information and talk to them about what they're looking for as well. They're also a liaison between the internal and external stakeholders. They need to understand what's being requested, and they act like a funnel. So they get that big list of everything everybody wants, and then they're going to funnel it down into the actionable items, what the Scrum team should be actually developing. They also need to evaluate the project progress, seeing the work as it's completed in the sprint, be thinking about what's next, that sort of thing. And participating in daily Scrum is really important. So then they can build a relationship with the Scrum team. They can see what they're working on. They're available to answer questions. Being with the team, being a part of the team. And then the dreaded terminating a sprint. If the team is inextricably blocked due to predecessors, dependencies, unanswered questions, whatever it is, the PO is the one that needs to make that decision that we're going to terminate that sprint. And we really need that product owner to clear those blockers and to basically fix what happened to stop our sprint. And Jack, did we have a question for the group?
We do. We have a poll. Do you get enough time with your product owner today? Thank you to those that I see responding. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. All right, let me share the results.
All right, it looks like we're pretty even. So if you don't work with the product owner right now, that's fine. Some of you don't, but there's got to be somebody that you're getting direction from. And the techniques here that I'm going to present here can be certainly applied to that relationship. If you do get enough time with your product owner, congratulations, you're one of the lucky ones, and I am actually jealous of you. But if your situation changes, or if you want to maximize your time with your product owner, I think some of the techniques that I'm going to present here today are going to help you with that. For those folks who don't get enough time with your product owner, you know what? I feel your pain. It's a common situation. And most POs do have other full-time jobs, and they're not dedicated 100% to your project. So today we're going to talk about ways to make your life easier by making their life easier. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my situation and where I was when I started with this project. So initially I was brought into the project as a consultant, and as part of my onboarding, I was told that my product owner is a director and that he approached the project with a director mindset, meaning he wasn't used to having his statements questioned. He was used to, giving a direction and, make it so you get it done. And I was immediately anxious by that, because what does a BA do? They ask questions. They come up with alternate solutions and alternate ideas, and dealing with a product owner who doesn't like to be questioned or have anything changed was a challenge right away. Initially, we set up, we had several meetings to go over the project vision and to learn about, so while I was doing, getting the background on the project, I was able to observe him, ask questions. I learned a lot about his personal style, some of his likes and dislikes. So really, along with getting information on the project, I was also gathering information on him as a product owner, as a person. After that initial work, after that, we only had 15 minutes a week of dedicated time. And, that was another warning flag for me. Another warning flag was that he had no Agile Scrum training or experience. He did not attend product owner training. So I knew right away that this project was not going to be moving along the way I'd initially expected. Another factor, with only having 15 minutes a week one-on-one time with me, he had limited time to work with 2 Scrum teams. I had 2 Scrum teams on this project for about 12 people. He was rarely able to attend daily Scrum. He did not have time to hear the questions as they came up, to understand our issues. He occasionally attended backlog refinement and sprint planning, but when he was able to attend, he just kind of sat back and listened. And most of the time, the first time he saw the work that the team had completed was at the sprint demo. And, none of these things are what you want to see in an Agile project. Besides not having much time for the Scrum teams, he also didn't have much time with the business stakeholders. So, most of the time for all of our stakeholders, and we had in our sprint demos about 50 people, between 50 and 60. This was the first time they were seeing the product. And, they would always have a lot of feedback. And a lot of that feedback ended up being reworked for the team. And that was a very disheartening thing for the team, because they worked very hard to get this piece of the product completed. They're proud of it. And then all they heard was basically negative feedback on the work that they had completed, because our product owner did not know how important it was to run the initial thoughts by all of the different stakeholders. And like I mentioned, this was a $150 million multi-year project, and it was really up to me to figure out how I was going to keep that moving forward.
That's great. So Jen, what are some key things that lead to success as a business analyst working with a product owner?
So my solution to keep the project moving was to meet him where he was and show him how I could support him. And I know it sounds simple, but when I realized that he needed help navigating this process, and I knew that I was able to help him to be successful, why wouldn't I?
What techniques have you used to build a working relationship with your product owner and even the project team?
Yep. So for me personally, I always start with the soft skills. And the number one that I started with was being supportive, letting my product owner know that I respect how much work they have and their time. This is a director, and he was double, triple booked all day, every day. And, I let him know that I respected that. And I also let him know right away, it's my job to help you, to support you, and to make your job easier. And he wasn't aware of that because he was used to working in waterfall, where he would make statements and a requirement would be written, and all of the statements would be in a spreadsheet with 100 or 200 or 500 rows, and each one was a requirement. And so he was very used to that. He wasn't ready for Agile, where we would get something completed in a day or two and then show it to him and say, what do you think about this? So he wasn't ready for any of it. And so because of that, when I was working with him, in my communications with him, I would use every opportunity I could find to gently educate him on the differences between waterfall and Scrum methodologies. And I'll kind of go into that in a little bit later. Next was building a trust relationship. Of course, it's critical to meet them where they are, learn about them, their likes and dislikes. And again, I went into those initial meetings with him, really asking a lot of questions. How do you like to be communicated with? Feeling him out for his sense of humor, what his personality was like, asking test questions to see how he reacted to them, stuff like that. And you really need to learn your project thoroughly. Talk to everybody you can, do your research, know what you're working on, and be honest with them. Don't just tell them what he wants to hear. Tell them what they need to hear. Let them know if something isn't possible, but also be ready to offer alternate solutions or different ideas. Be present and available. Honor your commitments. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you can't do it, let the product owner know right away. Don't fear failure, because we are all human and we all make mistakes. And a really hard one, at least for me, is admitting when I'm wrong. I think I understood the product owner. I went in this direction, and then I find out it was the wrong direction. And just admitting that and saying, okay, yes, I made a mistake. Now, what should we do next? How can we handle that? Being flexible. I made myself available to work with him at any time. And that included early mornings, after work, late in the day. Sometimes it'll be 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, over lunch hour. Whenever he had time to talk, I would be there ready to go. And I kept trying different techniques until I found things that stuck. And that's what we'll talk about a little later on. And then I was always ready to change my plans to meet the needs of the product owner. I might have a meeting scheduled. He had something come up. Okay, I have to reschedule. How are we going to handle that? Those sort of things, always being flexible and being creative. I found something that works for me that I enjoy is bringing a little humor, a little lightheartedness into communications. I found that with this product owner, adding a meme to my email message. If maybe I was frustrated about something, I had a meme with somebody pulling their hair out, or if something went really well, I would do, dancing through the flowers meme, and just kind of keep the communications lighthearted, because that really cut down on a lot of stress for both of us. And then coming up with unique solutions. I was new to this project, and new to this company, so I didn't have any preconceived notions. And so I was able to come up with out of the box ideas constantly. But even if you are used, you've been working in a project for a long time, you've been working in a company for a long time, don't follow this is the way we always did it mentality, or this is the only way it'll work, because having those out of the box conversations, giving different ideas can really start a conversation on that. And you might find that you hit on something, or you trigger somebody else to think, and then they hit on something that would fix a problem, fix an issue, give you a different way to go that ends up being better in the long run. Tailoring your communication, don't be afraid to drill down, ask questions, get down to that core of the issue. Active listening, as I mentioned earlier, the product owner would give me a 1-sentence statement. We must be able to do online billing in this new project, for example. And I repeated back to him what I heard, the different thoughts I had. Okay, if we're going to do billing, we'll need this and this and this, and what about this? And that sort of thing. There were times when I repeated back to him what I heard, and he'd be like, no, that's completely not what I meant. And it's like, great, now let's talk about that. Instead of, very stern director giving me directions, and I just kind of would go away and do my best. I was always right there and engaging him when I had him. And then, some of them want to be emailed. Some of them want a Teams chat or a Teams meeting. Some people want to be, pick up a phone and talk to them. So really understanding the different ways that they want to be communicated with. And then besides tailoring the communication, keeping them apprised of everything that's going on in the project is critical. And I'm going to talk about that too later on. And last but not least, problem solving. Again, drill down until you get to the root of a request or an issue or a problem, and then deconstruct. If an issue comes up, say, for example, with a team, really deconstruct it and work with the team, because a lot of the times they have the knowledge and experience, and they could recommend alternate paths, alternate ways of doing it, different ideas. And so when you go to your project owner and you say, you know what, we can't do that, but we could do this and this, or we could do this, and give them kind of suggestions and ideas and alternate things to think about, they really appreciate that. And that is very helpful for them. So the first technique I'm going to talk about, and thanks, Jack. The first technique I'm going to talk about is brainstorming. For me, learning about the new project, and for the billing example, I said, okay, billing, what does that entail? What do we have today? And really asking the question over and over, getting it fleshed out. And so in my example, we have collections for delinquent payments. We have notifications that, your invoice is ready. We have client-facing reports. We have payment processing, different things like that. And so he would give me billing, and he would give me the different features. But then I would say, what does this mean? What do we have today? What do you want for tomorrow? And in a perfect world, it wouldn't just be my product owner. It would be different stakeholders and subject matter experts with. And there were times when I just had the product owner, and I would do the initial one, but then I would bring it to different stakeholders. Maybe we'd have a stakeholder meeting, and I would bring this up again, and I would have them help flesh it out and give more information. And one thing I wanted to mention, I did this in Xmind. Xmind is a great software for mind mapping. It makes it super easy. So when you could have a bunch of people yelling things at you, and you can just be putting it in, super easy to use. And I was using the free version. There is a free version of it. There is a paid version, but just for simple mind mapping, the free version is perfect. Next, we have story mapping. And I use Miro for this. Again, Miro, I use the free version. And Miro is really, really helpful for doing things like this. So I took the information from my brainstorming session, and I would start working on mapping out the different features and user stories. And one thing I want to mention is having a persona is very important. I know recently they've kind of fallen out of favor a little bit, but really for this giant project, having several personas, and I had a persona for each different department, it allowed me to ask that question. Okay, so you want this feature. How will that help our persona Sue? How would that help her do her job? Or, and so I could have that conversation. And it really helped the product owner once he started doing it. It really helped him again when he was that funnel to look at things and say, you know what, that isn't really going to help Sue. Let's not do that one, or let's table that. So in this example, I do apologize, it's a generic sample, but in my story mappings, they're all proprietary information, and I wasn't able to redact it enough to be able to use an actual one. But if you're unfamiliar with these, you're going to start with the highest level with the user activities. Then you're, for example, organizing email, managing email. Then you're going to go into the different tasks. What do you do when you're organizing your mail? You might search for an email, you might file your email, and then you're going to go down into the user stories. However, at this very high level that I was working in as part of the brainstorming or the mind mapping, each of these different stories, the yellow guys, usually ended up being a feature. And then under the feature, we would have those multiple stories. And then another nice thing that I attempted to do for him is look at how much time we have between our releases and kind of group them into, we could perhaps get this done in, for this release, and then this chunk done for that release. And again, this is an agile thing that he really appreciated that I was helping him with, helping him organizing it, helping him get that persona so he could think differently about the requests he was getting, grouping them into releases, because in waterfall you get that giant list of requirements and then you give it to the developers and they build it and then it's done and the whole thing is done. Whereas in this, we're building it in increments. So again, just taking those opportunities to educate the product owner on Agile in my case. The next technique was meeting notes. And this technique really opened my relationship with this product owner. And I'll explain to you why. Initially, I was not invited to the high-level stakeholder meetings that the PO set up. And after a couple, I went back to him and I said, why don't you have me there? And he says, well, you can't contribute anything. And I was like, well, that was director thinking. And I told him that it's important for me to be there so that I can understand what all these different stakeholders are asking for and be an extra set of ears for you. And oh, by the way, I will take detailed notes and you'll be able to concentrate on the conversation. And when I said that, he got really interested. He was like, that is a good point. So I started getting invited. And at the first few meetings, I just listened. I took very detailed notes. One feature that I did for him was I added takeaways. So different things I heard during the meeting that maybe someone was going to do by a certain date. I would put all of that in the takeaways. I would list who was the owner of it. If I knew a due date, I would add that in there. And then I also followed up on those. So for example, if there was something due next week, I would look in my meeting notes and I would say, oh, product owner Sue is going to do this by tomorrow. Do you think we should follow up with her on that? And he just loved it. He was like, oh my God, I totally forgot about that. So being the detailed notes, another thing that I did was once I felt comfortable with the stakeholders, they knew who I was, I would start asking questions during the meeting and I would add in a Q&A section so that he would see what questions were asked and what the responses were. Another thing that I did, and especially for those initial ones, was when I couldn't talk, of course, my brain was going with all of these different questions. So I added the questions into the meeting notes and I started putting them in red. So you can see in the example on the left, for Jack, and then there's a statement, I asked for 15 minutes twice a week. And I would send him the meeting notes with all my questions. And I discovered that I started getting responses to the meeting notes. And I should mention too, 2 Scrum teams, giant project. I had a bunch of questions on a daily basis, and I used to fire them off to the product owner as soon as I had the question, but he never responded, or it would take him a day or two to respond. And so just to make my life easier, I started combining them into just one email at the end of the day. I would just send it to him with all my questions in a bulleted list. And when I started putting in, the different colors, here are my questions for you, I noticed that he would start sending them back, and even his emails, he would send back in a different color. His response was in a different color. So in this example, I asked for the 15 minutes twice a week. He said, sorry, I just don't have that availability in a different color. My other questions you can see in there are answered in different colors. And so that was a way for us to communicate when we did not have that face-to-face time. And as a matter of fact, one day I was hustling to a meeting, and he spotted me in the hall back when we were in the office. And he says, I just wanted to thank you for making this change, because he was only able to read my emails and read the meeting notes in the evenings, later in the evenings, because he was so busy all day. So he liked the fact that everything was right there. He had one email, he had 1 or 2 meeting notes. He could see all the questions, he could answer them all, get them back to me the next day. And so by making actually my life easier, I made his life easier. So it was a win-win for both of us. So I would love to hear if, excuse me, we have one more. The mockups, how could I forget the mockups? So because we had a large UI portion in this project, I was always thinking about how it would look. So what we were doing is we were replacing an existing system, and we were going to make it like way better than the original. And so in having meetings with the product owner, meeting with the stakeholders, they would describe to me different ways they want things to look and different placements. And, we need this functionality, but it's here now. It isn't a great place. And so I'm always thinking about how it would look in my head. So I found Balsamic, which is a very low cost. That one isn't free. There are some free functionality, but I think I got the really low cost. And I started mocking up what was in my head based on the meetings that I had with the product owner. And I sent one to him one day, and he said, oh my gosh, who made this? I said, well, I did, based on the meeting we just had. And he was like, this is so great. And he loved it. And I started doing it more. And he always had comments. So I'd send him the mockups, and he'd have comments. And you can see in the example, there's little sticky notes with his comments. And then that was so successful that he would start editing the mockups himself and then sending them back to me. And so that was super cool. If I had open questions remaining, I literally would create a mockup guessing at what it should look like based on what I knew about the project, and filling in where my question areas were. I would fill them in, and then he would respond and say, oh, I like that. Oh, I don't like that. And his response was answering my question. So it wasn't a question in an email. Now I could kind of put my questions in mockups, and he was able to answer them very quickly. And he actually enjoyed it. The mockups made it fun for him. So that was a big win, and the meeting notes were a big win. So again, I was trying all these different techniques. I did process mapping and swim lane diagrams and use case diagrams, and they were okay, but they didn't grab him the way these techniques that I'm showing you here now. And I'm curious to see what techniques, if you've used any of these techniques yourself.
All right, there's another poll up, and I'm just going to give it a few seconds for people to respond. Thank you to those I see responding. I'm just going to give it 2 more seconds, and then I'll share the results. Great, thank you. Let me share the results.
All right. So a lot of brainstorming, a lot of story mapping. Those are great. I love brainstorming and story mapping because it helps me organize the information that I'm getting from all of these different places. So that's wonderful. No mock-ups. Mock-ups are awesome. And if you haven't tried them before, I would definitely pop into Balsamic. There is a free version and just start playing around with it. If you're working in the UI, of course, it's extra useful. But like I mentioned, my product owner just went crazy overseeing the pictures, which obviously meant when I was making a picture in my head at these meetings, he was doing the same thing. And this gave us a way to talk with each other. And then meeting notes is a communication tool. They're awesome. And I'm glad to see that some folks are doing it that way, because they are just a way, they aren't just boring. Here's what was said, or here's the decision that was made. But in my meeting notes, I really go into the discussions that happened. And there are times where I've done, and actually I frequently do it, where this person said this person responded, this person responded, this person said that. And that really helps the product owner when he wasn't at that meeting to understand what we were talking about. And it made it almost like he was there. So wonderful.
So Jen, I'm a BA on a project. My product owner doesn't have a lot of time. I'm familiar with the techniques, but now what do I do?
So for me, once I felt confident that I understood the project pretty well, and maybe it wasn't the whole project, this is a giant project, maybe I felt like I understood a feature pretty well, I offered to begin taking on day-to-day tasks, letting the product owner concentrate on that overall vision. So for example, with this permission, I began contacting the subject matter experts directly, freeing him up and preventing a bottleneck, because there were times when I just had a quick question and I knew the person that I could ask it to, and I would be like, please, could I just contact them directly? Could I do a quick half-hour meeting with them, and we could go through these different things, and I'll let you know what was decided. I always sent detailed meeting notes, and at first he was hesitant, but we actually had 2 sprints where the Scrum team could not move. They were stopped dead in the water. We didn't declare it a stop sprint, but we were dead in the water for days. And after that happened, and he realized that he was being a bottleneck, it actually sunk in, and he allowed me to start doing that. So that was a big win for me. Because I was unfamiliar with user stories and support requests, I began writing all of them based on information, from the meetings or that I knew about the project. And then I would send them to the product owner for review. He would review them, but a lot of the times he wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. And so he kind of even backed away from doing that portion. Next, I kept the backlog ordered and groomed based on what I knew about the project. If there was a feature that we were blocked on, a story, whatever, I would inform the PO, let him know that, the situation, what was going on, why this happened, if I knew why it happened, but just keeping him apprised. I began leading the backlog refinement, the sprint planning meetings. When he was able to attend, I always deferred to him, but then he deferred back to me. So it was kind of interesting. I worked really hard to make sure that he knew that I wasn't trying to take over his job, that I wasn't telling him he didn't know how to do his job. That he couldn't do his job. It was that you don't know this stuff yet. I am happy to teach you. I am happy to take on things until you're ready to take them on. I'm here to support you. And so we really built a relationship like that ended up being a really great relationship. And another thing that I did, approving completed stories. So if a story was finished in a sprint, they demoed to me, I approved it. I let the product owner know that I had approved it. If he had any questions, of course, he would come back to me in an email or a chat. I also began answering the Scrum team's daily questions because, again, the product owner couldn't attend. And I gave direction based on what I knew. I would notify the PO if I made a decision on something that I wasn't quite sure about, but I wanted to keep that team moving. I would tell them, okay, can you go up to this point, and then I'll connect with the product owner and make sure it's okay. So again, keeping them in the loop but keeping my teams moving as well. And then the biggest thing that I did was performing the sprint demo to over 50 stakeholders. And again, this was oftentimes the first time that product owner had ever seen the product. He didn't know what the team had been building. And, it was kind of a surprise to him, which was a little bit sad, but, it was a situation we were in. He wasn't able to be there all the time.
So Jen, are there techniques or approaches that you used that you found didn't work?
Oh, yes. Yes. I think I mentioned earlier, every time I had a question, I would fire off an email. And that was getting nowhere. So then I started grouping for my convenience, and it ended up being better for him. Demanding time with the product owner, telling him, I have to talk to you today. I can't move forward without talking to you. You don't demand from the product owner, but you can very firmly request. Let him know the situation, what's going on. I need to talk to you today because why? I make that very clear to him. A technique I started in the beginning was looking at his calendar, scheduling the meeting without looking at his calendar. And like I mentioned, most days he was double, sometimes triple booked. So telling him, I need to put a meeting on the calendar. Is there any day or time that works for you? I see your calendar is completely full. And he would always come back and say, yeah, I know my calendar is really full, but the meeting on Tuesday at 2:00 is one that I'm optional on. So why don't you schedule it there? So, working with him to get that going. Don't just put one on the calendar and expect him to show up. My product owner said if there was any emergency that I could call him on the phone. An issue came up that I felt was an emergency. I did pick up the phone and call him. He was in a board meeting and he had forgotten to turn his ringer off. That was very embarrassing for him, and it was very bad for me. And he let me know, do not call him without looking at his calendar. So again, we worked on it. He knew it was partly his fault. He didn't have his ringer off, and we just kind of talked about it. But at first, he was very upset about that. Another thing that I found with this particular person, letting him see my frustration and with sarcasm or snark or being short with him really made him defensive and angry. And it wasn't helpful at all. So this is where I mentioned earlier, I am feeling very frustrated. I'm actually anxious, frustrated. I might be a little angry. And I would do a meme with the hair pulling out, or I would do different things in the email and saying, okay, I am so frustrated about this. Is there any possible way I can get time with you? Or can I just, do you know who I could talk to about this so I don't have to keep bugging you about it? And just doing different things like that. Another thing that did not work well is continuing to wait. If I've sent 3 requests for the same piece of information or the same decision, it's time to hunt him down. And there were times where I would look at his calendar, I would see he was in a meeting in this room, in the building, and I would, position myself there a couple of minutes before the end of the meeting so I could just happen to be there when he was coming out of that meeting on his way to another meeting. And then we would talk as we were walking. Again, that's harder now that we've gone full remote, but a way that I kind of compensate for that is in Teams chat. I'll start a chat, I'll ask him a quick question, and then he answers that when he's able. But I think the worst thing to do was waiting until the question was answered, doing nothing until the question was answered. The previous people working on the project kind of did that. And that was the whole reason that I was brought in, was because they weren't getting anything accomplished, because they were waiting to have all of the questions answered before they could go. And again, with Agile, you don't do that. You don't have all your questions answered. You don't even have most of your questions answered, and you start going. So to sum it all up, become a partner with your product owner. Really become a partner. I mean, they're people just like you. They're working a full-time job. Oftentimes, they have no idea what you can do for them. And remember, you both want your project to be successful. So learn how to work together with them. Over communicate. They need to be kept in the loop at all times, and actually people that are less engaged in the day-to-day need a lot more help to be kept in the loop. They don't necessarily know what's being done, where the issues are, if there were changes in direction, if new ideas came up during daily scrum. They don't have any of that knowledge. And so it's really up to you to do your best to keep them in the loop. And keep trying different techniques until you find one or two that work. With my product owner, it was meeting notes and mockups. With your product owner, it could be use case diagrams and process flows. But just keep trying different things until you hit on what communication tool is best for you and your product owner in your project. And then when you're ready, offer to take tasks off their plate. Let them concentrate on the larger project vision, the different things that they can do. As I educated my product owner in the different Scrum things, he started seeing the value in being at sprint planning, the value of letting me demo private. He started having me as stories finished in the sprint. Very late at the end of the day, he would have me demo those stories during the sprint to him, so that when he got to the sprint demo with all the stakeholders there, he knew what he was looking at and he could speak to it. So really that's kind of slow, gentle education, becoming a partner with them. We're both in this together, and trying to make it as fun as possible during the day.
Thank you, Jen. This is great information. So this brings us to the Q&A portion. Again, if you have some questions, please type them in the Q&A feature of the webinar. And Jen, it looks like we've got a few questions. So you were mentioning that after a while, you were able to take on the day-to-day tasks for your product owner.
Mhm.
But I don't have time to do that. Is there anything else I can do?
So I guess for me in my project, I had bandwidth because without my product owner giving me direction, I literally had nothing to do. There was nothing I could do. So in my case, yes, I did have the bandwidth. If you're a BA and you've got multiple projects you're working on, and two of your projects are humming along, but that third one has a new product owner who isn't sure what they should be doing. Again, I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you need to build a relationship with them. You need to use your soft skills, and you need to be able to move your projects along. So just like I carved out time with my product owner, I hopped on a meeting that was already existing for him. It allowed me to get time with him, and maybe there are different ways looking at calendars that you could do that. Get yourself in more time with that product owner and take on the parts that you can take on, but make it a partnership. Talk to your product owner about, hey, you know what, I have bandwidth, I could take on, I can make sure that all the stories are ordered in the order I think you want them in, and you can swing by and move them if you want, but I just need to keep the team, knowing what they're going to do next, and just figuring out ways to be able to help out your product owner in the way that they need and in the ways that you are able.
Great. Looks like a couple more questions. So you mentioned process flows. We use process flows very heavily in my organization. And you mentioned that you do them, but that's not really a technique that you really covered. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you have done for process flows or how that's worked for you?
Sure. So for process flow diagrams, I keep them very high level when talking to the product owner. We do have a solution architect on our team. So any of the data flow diagrams, any of those very low level ones, he handles that. So for the high level, I was doing things like in my project, we're building a UI, and that UI needs to talk to about 24 different systems and databases. And so when we would get a new feature, I would map out where the different parts of, this database needs to be involved in that one and that sort of thing, keeping them in order for me and for my team. But my product owner really didn't care. I mean, he was director level. He was like, yeah, I don't care what you have to do to get the work done, just do it. And so that's why I did them for my teams. But the product owner, which is kind of the context of this webinar, it wasn't helpful with my relationship with him. It was helpful with my Scrum team, however.
Great. And it looks like we just have one last question. What do you do when you go to schedule meetings and some people aren't available because their time is blocked?
Yeah, that one happens all the time. So a few things I've done. If it's something that can be scheduled a little further out, I found a lot of success in scheduling for the next week and the week after. If it's something that I know I need to talk to stakeholders about, but it isn't urgent for today, scheduling that as far out as possible, you're going to find their calendars are cleared up or more clear. If it's something that's urgent, and I look at the calendar and there is no way, let's say I need 3 people, I need my product owner and 2 subject matter experts. If I can't find anything in the next few days or whatever time period I need it in, I would go back to my product owner and I would say, I need to talk to these 2 people and I have a bunch of questions for them. Do you mind if I contact them separately? There were times when I got one of the subject matter experts and the product owner, and then I would do a second meeting with that other stakeholder that I needed to talk to. So being creative in figuring out, you might need to divide and conquer, you might need to move it out in the future. And if it's something super urgent today, I have had them drop what they're doing. If we hit something, I message all 3 of them, for example, on Teams, say we have an emergency now, I need you now. Now, I didn't do that but twice in 3 years. So when I did that, he knew it was an emergency and he actually did stop what he was doing and come. So you don't want to cry wolf and say, it's an emergency.
Yeah, great.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much for sharing your experience.
Mhm.
And thank you everybody for joining. This concludes our webinar. Please look for the recordings of our webinars on our YouTube channel and be sure to follow us on our social media channels. Also, if you do have any questions, please send an email to info@digineer.com. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.